When reflecting tonight on what I wanted to talk about, all I could think about is how much more can you really hear about leadership? Like, seriously, there are thousands of books, there are thousands of speakers, there are people who charge thousands of dollars to talk about leadership. And, I'm just one person, one cog in a very large wheel called leadership. And when I thought about it, I thought, what I can really only do is share with you some of my experience and some of the things that I've learned over the years that have become truths for me, both in my role as a leader, but also in the work that I do in counseling and coaching others to lead. As mentioned, I've had an incredible privilege working for 3 really amazing Canadian companies. I mean, you can actually picture this, go down to Canadian Tire, get your swimming gear, get all that stuff, grab a coffee, and then jump on a WestJet flight. Like, this is quintessential Canada. And, it's been really quite an amazing journey. So I had 7 years at Canadian Tire, almost 15 years at Tim Hortons, and now just a year and a half here with WestJet. 3 really amazing companies, and then the honor to have worked with both General Electric and Honeywell prior to that. It is such a bed of learning from really great leaders, and so I hope to share with you some of the insights that I've learned over that time. So this is my journey. And I think of leadership a lot as a journey. It is clearly not a destination, unless maybe if you're Colin Powell, then he's pretty much there, in my opinion. But for the rest of us humans, it's a journey. And that journey for me has been almost 30 years now in human resources, and I'm going to draw on that as I talk about what I've learned. The other thing that I will save for the end for a couple of comments is around what that journey's been like as a female. And at times being the only female in the boardroom, many times actually, and what does that mean, and what have I learned through being in that type of a position? So here's some of the things I'm going to talk about. Some of these things are dichotomies, and so as I speak to them, you might sort of at first say, what is she trying to say? But hopefully you'll understand more. So I'm going to talk about leadership being a journey, that truth is not always true, that to drive change, you must not change, that the hard stuff is the soft stuff, that vulnerability is not a weakness, it's a strength, that we need to set direction in order to go off course, and finally, on how it takes humility and courage to exercise those things I just referred to. Let me first talk about the journey. I remember when I became a parent. I have three children, and as I say, relatively sane, as all 3 of them are teenagers. As a parent, any of you have parents out here? Lots. You might recognize this. Do you ask yourself, am I doing the right stuff? Am I spending enough time with my kids? Am I bringing them up the right way? Am I doing the right thing? And you drive yourself crazy with that as a parent. And a very wise person said to me, his name is Nick Forrest, and he runs a company called Forrest & Company. They're a consultant. He made a statement to me one day when we were at a workshop, and he said, the fact that you are asking yourself this question over and over and over again on how to be a better parent, by definition, means you're a good parent. And I thought a lot about that as a parent. And it was very meaningful to me because I also apply it to leadership. And if you think about it, if you are asking yourself over and over and over again, how can I be a better leader? By definition, you're a good leader. If you're not asking, you should not lead. And I believe that very sincerely. The moment any of us thinks that we've arrived as a leader, I believe is the moment you get out of leadership. So another way to put it, the more I learn about leadership, the more I know how little I really know. So the next piece, the truth is not always true. And this came from another very wise leader that I worked with. His name is Wayne Sales. Wayne was the CEO of Canadian Tire and is an incredible human being above being an incredible leader. And I was leaving Canadian Tire to join Tim Hortons. And the CEO, I was just a director, and the CEO asked me in for an exit interview. That in itself was amazing. But as I sat down and we talked about my new role at Tim's and his excitement for me, and it was a great opportunity to have that chat, he said, I'd like to ask you some advice. And I said, sure. He goes, how would you say, how would you advise me as a relatively new CEO of what I should be doing? And I was honored, and I said, that's a big question. I said, I guess I have a question back for you. And I said, what keeps you awake at night? And he stopped, and he looked around his office, and he said, the truth. And it struck me in that moment how wise this man was. Because, as humans in organizations, we don't mean to do it. We're not malicious. But what happens in every organization I've ever been in is that the truth is harder and harder to find the further you go up a hierarchy, whether that's in government or whether it's in organizations, even in families, that it's harder to get at. And that if you find ways to make sure that you're always seeking out the truth, that it's an important leadership skill to be thoughtful of. And again, people aren't doing it maliciously. Oftentimes when you're going up a hierarchy, people are trying to, not bother you with details, or they're trying to solve issues before they get to you, or sometimes they're trying to position politically for things. It's a number of different things that come into play. Bottom line is, as you go through every screening of information, the truth gets further away from you. So thinking about how to obtain the truth is a key leadership skill. Driving change means you have to not change. So what do I mean by that? Humans, our nature is to avoid change. We don't like it. It just don't, I always say, when leaders say, people don't want to change, et cetera, I said, just stop it. Don't complain about it. Accept it, because it just is fact. And in fact, every one of us are exactly the same. So it's not like because we're more senior or whatever that we accept change easier. No, we don't. No one, the human being, human condition, does not like change. So when that happens, when people have a lot of change coming at them, they feel insecure, they'll feel unstable. It's like the ground, we call it shifting sands, The shifting sands underneath, you start to feel unstable. And that doesn't feel safe. When you don't feel safe, you don't take risk. It's a fact. So when you want people to change and embrace change, it means you want them to take some risk. You can't have them take risk if they're feeling shaky. So what do you have to do? You have to find ways to give them their Rock of Gibraltar. You have to find ways to talk about the things that are not going to change so that they can touch that and know that something's not going to change, and then they feel confident to be able to embrace the other changes that you're asking. Our current CEO, Greg Saretsky, so now here comes my WestJet plug. You knew it had to come. Right, WestJetters? Yoo-hoo! Yay, WestJetters! Our current CEO, Greg Saretsky, knows this very, very well. When you look at what WestJet has been through, and since this is a Calgary crowd, you'll know this better than I do, having been new to Calgary. WestJet was a little airline that could, right? And then did. And it is an incredible story, but it is also the airline that was going to just be one airplane. It was never going to go west of Winnipeg. It was always going to have one type of seat on the plane. All those things were core to who WestJet was. Well, in the last 5 to 6 years, WestJet has launched WestJet Encore. It's a new fleet type. We're about to launch our wide bodies, so that will give us a third fleet type that we have. We are no longer one base. We are multiple bases, which was a huge change for our system. We no longer have just one type of seat or product on the aircraft. We have Plus, and we have other seats on the aircraft. We have gone into partnerships, and never mind going east of Winnipeg. Good Lord, we're in 90 different countries now through our partnerships. So this little airline has become a large and very complex organization. And that scares the crap out of people because it's not like it was. And, not allowing for that to occur emotionally is a big leadership mistake. So what Greg goes out and speaks to our employees about constantly is what we will do will change. And it will continue to change because our business needs to continue to evolve and grow. But there are things that will never change at WestJet. We will never change our culture of care and ownership at our company. Care stands for creating a remarkable experience. That's for our guests, and that's for each other in employment. And we won't change that about who we are and how we do our things, but we will change what we do. So you give people a chance to say, you know what, I know now that something won't change. I have more courage, more confidence to take on the things that will. Next, the soft stuff is the hard stuff. Any of you who have been anywhere close to mergers and acquisitions, there's been a lot of studies around M&As, and something in the neighborhood of 90% of M&As 5 years later fail from their original goals. Now, what's the reasons why? Was it because the tax structure wasn't what was anticipated? No, that was nailed down. Was it because the real estate didn't kind of match up with what the real estate holdings would be in the new company? No, those things are nailed down. It is almost always about the people, the culture, the integration of what's going on a day-to-day basis between employees. I often hear, the HR is the soft stuff, but it's that stuff that is the hardest stuff to manage as a leader. So whether it's having that open, honest, direct conversation with your employees that might hurt, or whether it's delivering really tough messages, or it's maintaining fairness, not just equity, these things are tough leadership challenges that truly require us to think and think deeply. The hard stuff is the soft stuff. Vulnerability, one of my favorite leadership traits. And I will tell you, as an HR professional, I have grown up many times with leaders who are so afraid to be vulnerable. It's like, oh no, I have to know the answers. I need to be able to, otherwise they'll think I'm not a good leader if I don't know all of the answers. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Now, one thing I will say is that might not be the case if you're a sports team. So I have a son who plays junior hockey in British Columbia. You don't want to show the other team your vulnerabilities. You don't want them to see that. But it is not the truth for a leader. It's very different. So think about it for a moment, that as a leader, and think about leaders that you know, a leader who might admit a mistake, or apologize for something that they did that they understand now that they shouldn't have done, or asked you for help because they don't have enough information, they need your help. What happens inside your head? Do you want to take advantage of them? No. You want to help. And that's what vulnerability as a leader is so, so powerful. Because I think the way I look at it, vulnerability leads to a humanness. That when you're vulnerable, you're human. When you're human, humanness leads to connection. When you're connected to me, you can relate to me. And when you relate to me, you would create trust. And trust is a pinnacle of being a great leader. Whoever thought that Sigmund Freud would be a leadership guru, but he does have a great quote that I thought was very meaningful in that he says, out of vulnerability comes your strength. And I believe that very strongly. A previous CEO that I worked with at Tim Hortons, by the name of Don Schroeder, showed this in spades. He was incredible from the standpoint of he would often come to groups where he was a lawyer by trade and had very little understanding of truly the operations of the business or specific areas like finance, etc. And if he didn't understand something, he came to those experts and he would say, listen, he would declare what he doesn't know. He would express incredible confidence in the people that he had in those roles, and then he would ask for their help. Now, what would you do? You're going to help. And not only are you going to help, you're going to make sure that this leader who has now put their trust in you is going to be successful. So his show of vulnerability of saying, I don't know how to do this, I need your help, causes people to jump in and really want to help them be successful. There's an old saying, right? Never let them see you sweat. And maybe in this situation it's probably appropriate, but generally I will say to you, I call BS. I call BS. Let them see you sweat. Let the people that you lead know that you have fear about things, know that you care about things, express it. If you have concern about things, if you're sad about things, it's okay. Because then you can work on what you're going to do differently. Again, it comes back to how it makes sense that this makes us human. Because if I see my leader in a human light, I can relate to that person, I can learn from that person, and then I feel confident to take action. Setting direction so that you go off course. I remember a time, and it wasn't that long ago, that we used to do 5-year plans, and things actually went as planned, or pretty close. This is not the leadership environment we live in today. In fact, just this morning, we were in an executive meeting, and we were talking about what we're doing at our next leadership offsite. And we were saying, it was only 6 months ago that we had a $90 barrel of oil in our plans and a 90-cent Canadian dollar in our projection. It was 6 months ago. Now, if you do not have a company and a leadership style and capability to adjust within that and know how to be able to manage in those types of ruckus waters, I would say, you're in big trouble. So now, does that mean, well, heck, you shouldn't plan? Why would you bother planning or setting direction when everything's going to change in a month? So let's just kind of go with it, right? Well, no. My belief, from a leadership point of view, is that setting direction in the most tumultuous environment is more important than ever. And the reason that I say that is, as simple as picture driving in a car, you're going to a destination and it's very unstable conditions, and you go off into a detour and you're off your original direction, you will be lost. But if you have somewhere that you're going and you've been clear about that, you can go off cycle, you can go detour around all things, and then you get back together on how are we going to get back on track. If you don't have that as a leader or an organization, you're in bigger trouble than when things were stable. That's my belief. And lastly, let me talk a little bit about the traits of humility and confidence and courage in leadership. Humility and confidence are not mutually exclusive. Oftentimes people will think, oh, well, I'm either confident, or if I'm too humble, I'm kind of I'm not going to be a powerful leader. Now, confidence is also not arrogance. Arrogance is no humility. Confidence with humility is a powerful combination. People want a leader to be confident, to know who they are, to know where they're going, to understand what they want, and mostly to understand what they stand for. They want that in a leader. But at the same time, a great leader also understands their own weaknesses and is able to enunciate and surround themselves with the skills to make up for those weaknesses. Now, that great leader also has to have tremendous humility and courage to be able to expose their own weaknesses to their people. And that's where that comes in. Because if you have, you picture it, I know you know leaders like this who will not let you see a weakness. They keep that wall very high. And there's no way to help when that's the case. But when they let that wall down and they share who they are, and they show the humility of knowing and understanding I'm not good at something and I need your help to be good at it, your tendency is to go in and help. So I believe very strongly that strength of leadership comes from that type of courage. Now, I love one quote that Winston Churchill said, and this goes to both courage and humility. Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. I'll let that sink in, because often leaders feel they need to speak, and sometimes they do. But it's just as important to sit and listen. These words are wise indeed. So let me summarize some of my leadership lessons that I've learned with you. First off, be a truth teller. Be one of those people that tells the truth and tries to take away your biases so that you can really help your organization. And seek truth as a leader. Don't ever believe that you've arrived. Give people security and stability when you want them to embrace change. Find something that you can hang on to and that they can depend on so that then you can embrace change. Remember that the soft stuff is the hard stuff, and spend your time accordingly. Leaders are human first. Allow yourself to be vulnerable because it breeds trust. Set direction and then be ready to course correct. And finally, find the courage and the humility as core traits to be a leader, as they'll give you the ability to listen, which give you the ability to learn, to act, and finally to praise and to thank. And finally, I want to say a couple of things about just reflecting as being a female going through my career, and all the, how is it different, or how has being a woman at the board table been different for me. And one of the things that when I talk to younger women, I talk to them about one thing all the time, and that is the tyranny of work-life balance. And I say this to young men out there as well, because it's the same thing. We have this belief that we can balance our work and our life. And I'm going to call BS on that. There's no such thing as balance. I believe very strongly in something called consequence management. And what I mean by that is that there are consequences to every decision you are making in your career. And there are consequences at home, there are consequences at work. And if you choose to do certain things at certain times in your life, don't apologize for that, but understand the consequences that come with it. I can't emphasize that loud enough. I have had many occasions in my life where my consequences have been unacceptable, either at home or at work, and I've decided to rebalance. But it's being conscious about it that's key. The second is the value of gender diversity. And you heard this a little bit, but there is no question the studies are absolutely clear that gender diversity brings better decision making and makes more money, as our wonderful person said earlier today. But you know what? There's something else from that too. One of the stories I often tell is when I joined Tim Hortons, my team were all men, or all women, sorry, the opposite. They were all women on the HR team. And when we went out to recruit, because we were adding some new roles, I said, I want to bring men in. And guess what? For the very same reason that gender equality and gender diversity is important for females, it's important for men in general. There are certain functions that sometimes can be too heavily weighted with too many women. You need gender diversity there too. Men and women fundamentally think differently. And it doesn't make one better or worse, but when you put them together, it's always better. But one of the things that when I was younger in my career, I can say this now, couldn't say it at the time, but as a female, you don't have to be a man to succeed. And I say that because as a younger woman, most of the senior people were men. And I tried to, won't speak to others, but I tried to emulate what I was seeing. And so I was behaving like a man. You don't need to do that. You can be a woman and an executive, a woman and a CFO, a mom and a CEO. But you can still be the female. And that's the part about gender diversity that really works. Because I've also seen it where women have behaved so much like men that it's not actually gender diverse. So embracing that has been a big learning as a female. And lastly, this applies to work as well as at home. The tyranny of the urgent versus the important. You know, have you ever noticed that whether you're at home or whether you're at work, that things are becoming more and more urgent all the time? It's those dang Blackberries and iPhones that we have, that everything is immediate. And what happens is we get drawn to the immediate. And as a result, we often let go of the important. And I've done it so many times in my work. I've done it at my home. And being conscious of it is just so important, to stop once in a while and saying, am I doing what's urgent or am I doing what's important? And I got a great piece of advice, again, from another wonderful, wonderful leader that I worked with respect to how to manage my own life with my children and still try to maintain, an executive role. And he said, one of the things that he did with his kids is every year they had a choice where they went away together and they could go wherever they wanted, but the rule was no technology and no one else. And I implemented that about 4 or 5 years ago because, the tyranny of the urgent takes you away from your home so much that if you remove all of the urgency and go somewhere where you're quiet and it's just you, all of a sudden the wonderful importance comes back into life and the balance starts to feel better. But I'm sure you can relate, as a mom, an executive vice president, a wife, a friend, a sister, a daughter, I was pretty much the bottom of the list by the time you get to yourself. And typically, frankly, I very rarely got out of either the mom or the EVP role. There was pretty much nothing left otherwise. So because of that, it's really important in life and at work to stop and realign. Am I spending time on the right things? So this is why leadership in its totality, or parenting, or life, I think is a journey. We're constantly learning, we're constantly evolving, and if we stay curious, we'll constantly get better at it. And with that, I'll leave you with one final quote from one of my favorite musicians, John Lennon, to keep in mind on your journey. And this comes from a song called Beautiful Boy. And I used to sing it to my kids when they were going to sleep at night. But one line always stuck with me, and I use it with my kids all the time, and that is that life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. I'll leave that thought from John Lennon with you, as I thank you very much for your time this evening, and thank you for inviting me to speak to you.